Welcome to PHL247 Critical Reasoning. My name's Corey Lewis. I'll be your instructor for the semester. I hope this is going to be a worthwhile course for you. I usually teach philosophy, like mainly philosophy, so it's very rare that I get to tell a room full of people that I think I can actually help them in their day-to-day lives. Philosophy is very enlightening and spiritually uplifting and all that stuff, but this course might actually help you in your life, which is, I find it exciting. I hope you find it exciting. So today we're not going to do too much. We're just going to go over the basics of the structure of the course, the syllabus. I didn't bring paper syllabi, but they're on the syllabus is on the blackboard, which is live now, so you can look at it online. And we're basically just going to go through it line by line this hour. So let's do that. Right. So what is this course? What is critical reasoning in general? If I had to summarize it, I would say that critical reasoning is reasoning about reasoning. So it's obvious to me that every single one of you knows how to reason. You know how to evaluate arguments and evidence and all that stuff. It would not be possible for you to have gotten this far in your lives if you didn't. So every one of you already knows basically how to reason, but the promise of a course like this is that we can give you a couple tools to reason about reasoning. That is, we can help you take apart your own semi-automatic reasoning processes, make them less automatic, and give you greater access to the nuts and bolts of how it is you're thinking. So basically what we'll teach you is the standard philosopher's toolkit for thinking about arguments. And arguments are going to be one of the main issues of the course. So we're going to focus primarily on evaluating the quality of arguments. So things like this are going to occupy a great deal of our time, argument diagrams, where what I'll do is present you with some argument, some piece of text, and your job will be to identify its conclusion, that is the thing that's supposed to be proven, as well as the premises, that is the things that are supposed to prove that conclusion. So you'll separate out the bits of the argument, and then you can assess individually. You can say, is this a premise a good one? And is the inference from the premise to the conclusion a good one? And is the conclusion a good one? Now this is taking apart a bunch of steps that you usually just fly through automatically. You just see an argument and you know whether you think it's good or not. This will allow you to do a better job, more articulate job of taking apart what's good or what's bad about an argument. So it could be the case that a true premise doesn't actually, the premise is true, so they're saying true things, but it doesn't actually entail the conclusion. You separate that from cases like where the premise could be false, but if it were true, it would entail the conclusion, that kind of thing. So here's a couple of the schematic diagram and then a filled out one. My legs are itchy is a reason to believe that that was poison ivy, right? It's given not as an explanation, but as an argument. That is, the first thing is a reason for you to believe the second thing. So just being able to pick out arguments from non-arguments is one of the first things we'll deal with, but we'll get deeper into it, and you'll be doing what's called argument diagrams, so they can be much more complex than just one thing leading to another. So these are all a whole bunch of premises that all lead to the conclusion. And most of the first half of the course will be getting you to the point where you can take a few hundred words of text and break it down into an argument diagram like this. So explicitly representing what the relations of justification between premises and the conclusion are. Right? So you're making explicit how the structure of the argument is supposed to work. And as we go along, so I'll start you off with very simple arguments. Like this class is going to start off really simple, really mechanical, really straightforward. And for the whole semester, what we're going to do is just layer complexities and ambiguities on top of that. Because this is very much a course in informal reasoning. Right? So you've got all these fabulous formal reasoning tools like the axiomatic method and deductive proofs, mathematical techniques. Those are great when you have a really well-defined problem, when you have a really crisply defined thing that you're trying to work out. But for most of the time in most of your life, you're going to be dealing with ill-defined problems, problems for which it's not clear what the conclusion being argued for is, or it's not clear what the structure of the argument being offered for that conclusion is. So we're going to spend a lot of time dealing with the weird ambiguities and complexities of natural language arguments. So if you have a background in, say, symbolic logic, that'll help. It's not that it won't help, but we're dealing with different skills than you would learn in a formal reasoning class like deductive logic. Okay? We're dealing with the informal, where you have to take the content of the ideas into account. You have to take the context of the argument into account. You have to take all of these really complicated, really human factors into your considerations of how good the argument is. And I'll warn you up front that a lot of people find that really frustrating. You find it really frustrating because the kinds of tasks that many of you will have faced in your education thus far are well-defined. So they tell you exactly what they want as an answer, they tell you exactly the procedure to get that answer, and your job is just to turn the crank. This class is specifically intended to take you outside of the arena where there are well-defined answers. We're dealing with the informal aspects of reasoning where the whole thing is really just it's just genuinely a mess. And our job here is going to be to practice and learn how to navigate really messy contexts of reasoning. So argument diagramming is one of the main tools that we're going to develop in order to do that, because it allows you to see through the mess to an underlying structure that you can then evaluate in somewhat clearer ways. Okay, so I'd like to make a brief empirical case for you that this class might be worth your while. So this is from the best, most recent meta-study that I could find on assessments of the effects of classes like this. So this is from Instructional Interventions Affecting Critical Thinking Skills and Dispositions, a stage 1 meta-analysis. And the thing on the left is the distribution of how many standard deviations groups were able to go up after taking a course like this. So they took 120 or so interventions across about 100 different experiments and collected all of the results and saw how big of a difference would taking a class like this make to your ability to, I guess, do well on critical reasoning tests. And I'm sorry, I was expecting the screen to be larger. You can't really see, but so the peak of the bell curve here is around 0.5 standard deviations above where the group started. So if you start at the top of the bell curve, it'll take you like to here or something like that, which is not bad as an average, I would say. Up here, you get 1 and even 2 standard deviations. So if you started from here, you might get to here or even here, assuming that this class is one of the ones that does really well. Also worth noting that there are some in the negatives here. So after some critical thinking classes, students actually walked away doing worse on critical reasoning tests. I don't know why that would be, but hopefully this is not one of those classes. With any luck, we'll be on the happy side of the bell curve. And I mean, this is the only empirical evidence that I could find to suggest that a class like this will actually improve your ability to critically reason. As far as anyone can tell, these classes actually do help. People actually do perform better on the kinds of tests that we ask you to do. So, I don't know. Maybe that's evidence that you should take this class. And they actually, so in this meta study, they actually went through and teased apart not just the overall aggregate shape of the things, but what made a difference in people's ability to critically reason. Things like, was it better to give very general rules or specific case studies or a mix of both? And the finding was a mix of both was the best for producing better outcomes. So if you give people just the general rules, they'll get some improvement. If you give people just case studies, not so much. But if you give people an integrated mix of the two, then you get the good sort of like improvements. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to deal with a bunch of kind of randomly selected case studies. We're going to do case study after case study of arguments. And what you'll be asked to do is assess the argument in the context, right? So you'll be asked to say, OK, for this specific topic, what are the standards of reasoning that are relevant? Something like that. The examples should be contextualized, not purely abstract. And this is all 3 of these. And students should be required to deal with ambiguous cases, answering open-ended questions, not just memorizing formulas. So all 3 of these have to do with the kind of skill that critical reasoning is. And in the literature about this research, people say that like the enemy of properly critical reasoning is learning formulas and just applying them. So employers rate critical reasoning as one of the top skills that they want their employees to have. And what they mean by that is usually something like the ability to question assumptions and not just blindly crank through algorithms, right? So if your reasoning process is entirely insensitive, you're just like, I know what the formula says and I'm going to apply it at the end. You're not really doing critical reasoning as such. That's just reasoning. That's regular reasoning. Critical reasoning is when you ask yourself, is this formula the right one? What's my evidence for the data that I'm plugging into it? That kind of question where you're stepping outside of a formula that you've been given and trying to contextualize it from a meta perspective. So that's the kind of skills that we'd like you to be developing here. That's the kind of skills that your employers want you to have. And those are exactly the skills that would be defeated if I just gave you a bunch of really simple examples that you could simply and straightforwardly apply a formula to, right? So what we're going to do is start off with the simple, clear examples and then build up complexities, build up ambiguities. And sometimes the answer to the question will be, well, it's just not clear. And again, people find this, depending on where you're coming from in your sort of academic trajectory, people sometimes find this really frustrating because you're used to people giving you questions for which there is one and only one answer. And that's not always going to be the case here. Especially people with good formal training find this frustrating. People who have done a bunch of formal reasoning find the ambiguity in this class to be quite difficult to kind of cope with. If you're used to the ambiguity of things, if you're in, for example, a humanities course, you might find that less frustrating. You might find it frustrating for its formality and pickiness. So we'll find a way to frustrate all of you, don't worry. Okay, so here's the basic structure of the course, the basic assignments. We've got a couple of surveys that I'd like you to fill out. That's just, you get 2% of your mark just for filling them out. There are 3 online quizzes that'll be throughout the semester. There's 2 term tests and 2 argument analyses and an exam. So I'm going to go through each of one of those in a little more detail and talk about what they entail. So 2 surveys. The first initial survey is online now. And I want to emphasize that I cannot see who answered what, right? So I can see whether you answered the survey or not and when, but I have no access to whose answers are coming from, or which answers are coming from whom. So feel free to answer honestly. And the initial survey is really just trying to get some demographic information on you, like what year of study are you in, what program are you in, and any other kind of comments or suggestions or questions that you don't want to send to me personally, or that you'd like to send anonymously. Easiest 1%, you'll get all semester. Just fill the thing in. Due September 12th. Right. Then there'll be 3 online quizzes. These will be posted on the Blackboard. They'll consist of a small number, like 10 or 15 sort of thing, multiple choice questions. And the quizzes can be retaken as many times as you like before the due date. So I'll post these 1 week before the due date. You'll complete them on Blackboard. You can do them as many times as you want. You see your answer, your score after you've done them. This is fairly trivial. Like, this is meant to be a low stakes part of your mark. So nobody needs to panic about that. You won't be staying up all night to finish those quizzes. Partly it's just to have something to keep you on top of this course. Partly those quizzes will be structurally similar to the multiple choice sections on your 2 term tests and the exam. So what I'm using those for is to sort of signal to you what kinds of questions you can expect to see on the term tests and the exam. Any questions so far? All right, great. There'll be 2 term tests written during class time. I believe we'll be writing them in this room during regular class time. There'll be a multiple choice section, which again, I think it'll be longer than the quizzes, but it'll be structurally the same. It'll be the same structure of the questions with different content as the quizzes, so you'll be prepared for that. And there'll be short answer questions. These are those open-ended, ambiguous questions that I was talking about just a moment ago, where you're forced to sort of generate your own answer rather than just picking from one of them. And there may or may not be a short argument analysis or breaking an argument down into an argument tree or structure on one of those tests. Fairly standard stuff. Now, there's a major written component of this class. There are 2 argument analyses. And the structure of this is I'm going to post 2 weeks before it's due on Blackboard a short written argument. Last semester, I used editorials from Toronto newspapers, 400 to 600 words. And your job is going to be to analyze those arguments. That is, break them down into premises and a conclusion, tell me about the structure of the premises and how they're supposed to lead to the conclusion, and then assess them. There's a fairly formulaic way of doing that I'll present to you. And if you want to see examples of this, there are 5 sample argument analyses from last semester on Blackboard now. So if you want to see what the final written assignments look like, I've got 5 that were top scores from last semester. I'll point out that none of them got a perfect score. This is one of those things when you're dealing with ill-defined questions. It's very rare for anybody to get a perfect score on anything. But they all got top marks. They all got A+, so you can see what a really good argument analysis looks like. Right? And I believe those are in the range of 1,000 to 1,500 words, something like that. And it's not an essay style. I'm not going to have you write an intro and a conclusion. It'll be broken down into specific subheadings, and I'll tell you what the subheadings should be. So if you look at the argument analyses on Blackboard, you can see how they're broken down. So it's not writing in the full sort of humanities, you're writing an essay style thing, but it is writing. So if you find writing to be challenging or you haven't done much of it at a university level, I will strongly recommend that you go to this place, the Robert Gillespie Academic Skills Center. So there's a link on Blackboard already, and you guys can make an appointment beforehand. You can get one-on-one writing help. This is a great deal, and every year professors are baffled why more people don't do this. Somebody's offering to work with you one-on-one on your specifics. You bring them a draft of your thing. They'll give you comments. They'll give you help. So I strongly recommend that. Even if you have writing experience, this would be a useful thing to have. But if you don't, if you're not confident about your writing, get in touch with these guys. Get an appointment with them. They can help you a lot. Okay. Just a pure sort of administrative thing. So for any of these things, if you'd like an extension on either of the assignments, or if you missed a term test, or anything else like that, the UTM philosophy department has a nice system where instead of asking me for an extension, where I'm going to play favorites, like if I know your name and I like you, I'll give you an extension, and if I don't, I won't. So all of that's eliminated. You're going to go talk to Anya. So Anya Jolie is the UTM undergraduate advisor, and any request for an extension or any other special consideration should go straight to her. There's a special consideration form, and you can provide any supporting medical documents, and she will make the decision and tell me what's been decided. Okay? So to be clear, Anya's making the decisions about who's getting extensions and for how long and so on. Okay? I really like that system. I think it's much fairer than just having me arbitrarily decide. Anya will have a much sort of more holistic picture of what's going on. Okay. There will be a 2-hour cumulative exam. It will be multiple choice and short answer questions similar to the term test, as well as one argument analysis. So this is the same task that you've done on the 2 argument analyses throughout the semester. Obviously, our standards will be quite different on the one in the exam because you'll have like an hour to write it rather than 2 weeks. But you'll be doing the same basic task. Honestly, by the time you're done this, you should be able to look at an argument and just its breakdown should practically jump out at you. Like that's the goal for this course, is that you can immediately see what are premises, what are not premises, what's the conclusion, and what's the basic structure. So, an hour should be enough to, at least in the past, an hour has been enough for people to do this task. So, the only exception to talk to Anya is special requests for special consideration on exams. So exams are run by the faculty, not by our department. So you have to talk to the registrar. If you need a deferred exam, or if you missed your exam or anything like that, you need to talk to the UTM registrar. That's probably not relevant yet, but let's get it out there. Okay, and there's no textbook for this course. I'll post supplementary readings. A susurration went over the crowd. Hooray. I can recommend a textbook to you if you want supplementary readings. This course is mostly based on one, but I was told last semester that it didn't help much and that it would be better just go from lectures. So the main method of presentation in this class will be lectures, and I'll post sort of supplementary readings when appropriate on Blackboard. My plan is also to record and post all the lectures on Blackboard. So there'll be a recording of me. Be aware that like this microphone really only catches my voice, so it won't really catch any questions. I'll try to repeat questions as they're answered, and those recordings will be very boring for many of the parts because hopefully you'll be doing exercises in class. So I'll talk for a while, and then I'll send you to do an exercise, and then the video will get boring at that point. So it won't be very much fun to watch just from home. I do hope that you'll like show up to class. Your learning outcomes will be much better if you actually show up rather than just watch the videos, but I kind of leave that up to you. Okay? Right. So, any questions so far? I'm just going to go through the rest of the class. I'm just going to go through the basic topics and what we'll be talking about for the rest of the semester, point out due dates. Again, all this is on the Blackboard, so. Okay, so September 5th, that's now. September 7th, so on Thursday, and I would point out that the class on Thursday is not in this room. It's in a different room, so if you show up here, you'll be disappointed. Thursday, I'm gonna do kind of a brief history of formal and informal reasoning to ground this stuff and maybe give some context for what we're gonna do in the course. I'll just take you through a bunch of different sort of like historical models of how to think and bring you up to the present, and then talk a little bit about the structure of what we're gonna do. The next week we'll do the basics of arguments, that is breaking arguments down into identifying arguments and sort of differentiating them from things that look like arguments, like explanations, causal explanations, fiery rhetoric, also sometimes looks like arguments but isn't. So just getting into the basics of what is an argument, how are they structured. That's the easy bit. Then we'll get into, the next week, we'll get into dependent and independent premises, that is trying to figure out when two premises lend support to a conclusion each individually or only together. We'll get into that. And this is all in service of learning argument mapping, that is drawing those argument diagrams that I showed you just a few minutes ago. So at the end of that week, by that point, you'll have the ability to map very simple arguments. We'll be dealing with very simple arguments at that point, just to kind of get the fundamentals really, really clear in your mind. And then, as I said before, we're going to layer in layer after layer of complexity and ambiguity. So we'll start by talking about missing premises and removing things that are non-premises. So instead of an argument, at first I'll present you an argument with all of the premises explicitly written down. But in fact, that's not how people talk most of the time. So when people are presenting arguments, if something seems obvious to them and they expect it'll seem obvious to their audience, they'll just fail to say it, even if it's a crucial part of their argument. So learning how to articulate those hidden premises and to remove things that are non-premises is how we start to move into the kind of messy world of natural language from the kind of toy world that we'll start in. And then we'll do normativity, which is things like you should or you ought or something is wrong or something is good. There's a whole mess of questions around normativity, and any of the arguments that kind of matter in your life have normativity built in somewhere. So dealing with normativity will be another step in this sort of bringing the course into the more natural language context that you'll actually face in your actual life. Okay. Then we'll do test 1. That is, we'll cover everything prior to it, and then talk about clarifying meaning. That is, rephrasing things to make them clearer to you and to bring out the structure of the argument better. This is, again, we're just moving deeper and deeper into the messiness of natural language. And then October 10th, I think we'll just spend the whole hour just reviewing test 1 so that everything is super clear on that. And then we can get into, so all of that will be just getting you to the point where you can diagram an argument. where you can identify its premises, its conclusions, and the structure of the relations between the premises and conclusion. We won't have even begun to talk about, is this a good argument or is this a bad argument? And then after test one, we start doing exactly that. We start talking about what makes an argument a good one in informal contexts. In purely formal contexts, it's super easy to say what makes an argument good, that it's deductively valid, right? That's any mathematical proof is deductively valid. That's what makes it good, is that it's deductively valid. Quick, easy answer. I mean, it's nice, it's simple, it's clean. The problem is it just doesn't work for almost all of the arguments that people face in their life. Unless you're a mathematician, almost all the arguments that you face are not going to be completely deductively valid. They're going to be strong or weak. And we'll have to talk about many degrees of strength. And what you're going to learn is the ability to home in on what makes this specific argument strong or weak in which part. OK. So there are three parts to the method that we're going to learn for assessing arguments. We're going to assess the acceptability of premises. That is just about whether you think they're true or false. And then we'll talk about the relevance of the premises. That is whether they actually kind of would make you believe the conclusion if they were true. And then finally, the adequacy of the argument. That is, as a whole, is this thing convincing? Right? So that's acceptability, relevance, and adequacy. Halfway through that process, quiz 2 will be due, and test 2 will happen. All right. We'll finish off with adequacy. November 6th, the first argument analysis is due. November 6th is also the drop date. So I believe that's also the date to credit, no credit. Is that right? I'm not sure. OK. OK, so then by that point, you'll have submitted your first argument analysis. You'll have done argument mapping and argument assessment. And then we can move into the final third or so of the course, where we'll talk about, well, we'll just kind of enrich the material that we've already done with some further perspectives. I'd like to talk a little bit about, I'll spend a week on cognitive biases, psychology, 20th, 21st century psychology. If it's shown anything, it's shown that humans are not nearly as good at reasoning as we thought. Like when you put us in a context where we should show good reasoning, we very often don't. And psychologists have identified a whole zoo of different ways in which the average human being's reasoning departs from what we would consider, proper reasoning or like normatively good reasoning. So you can't cure yourself of cognitive biases, unfortunately. They seem to be built right in. Even a course like this will not cure you of cognitive biases, but you can be aware of them. It's about as good as you can do. You can be aware that you've got these biases built in, and you can take compensatory behaviors to like keep them from ruining your life. So we'll talk about that. The next week we'll talk about cognition and mental health and cognitive behavioral therapy, just for like a couple of hours. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a reasonably promising technique for people to deal with the cognitive side of their mental lives. That is, doing things like if you have a repetitive negative thought about yourself, it's a set of tools for intervening on it and asking basically critical reasoning questions about it. What's my evidence for this? Suppose you have a recurring thought like, I'm human garbage. The questions you should ask yourself are, what's my evidence for that, right? Why do I believe that? Where did that belief come from? And what am I sort of inferring from it? Right? So basically, cognitive behavioral therapy is applying the same skills that we've been developing the whole semester to your own emotionally charged thoughts. That's a bit of a experiment. I don't know if you'll be into that, but I think it might be helpful. And then just for fun, we'll do an hour on paradoxes, and then just review. And then that last day, your second argument analysis is due, and that's it. Oh, except for the exam, of course. So a note on the exam, it's sometime between December 7th and December 19th. It can be on a Saturday, I'm told. And we will not find out when exactly your exam is until much later in the semester. So this is something that's set up not by our department, but by the registrar's office, and they will not tell us until quite a bit later when your exam actually is. So the strategy should be to be available that whole time. Sorry, there's not much that can be done about that, I believe. Okay, that was it. Are there any further questions about this stuff? Okay, so my office hours will be Thursdays after class, the hour after. Please do make an appointment. You can get in touch with me by email. My email is on the syllabus. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Hope to see you Thursday.